This is the kissing gate of St Kyneburger's Church here in the village of Castor in Cambridgeshire. And it's one of the most beautiful medieval churches in England. And yet it's what's under this church's graveyard that's got our archaeologists very excited, because beneath my feet could be the remains of a mysterious Roman building. But it's not just one Roman building by itself. Over there in the school playing field, across there in the rectory, in fact, everywhere I look, archaeologists have found impressive Roman structures. This could add up to be something very special. Looks like it's going to be a hectic 3 days. That is, if I can ever get down again. And over the last 400 years, antiquarians, archaeologists, and even grave diggers have been discovering nuggets of Castor's intriguing past. Ben, you've been here before, haven't you? You're an old friend of William and his grave diggers.
Yes, I used to look after the archaeology in this area, so yes, I know William well.
Why? Why did you keep coming here?
Well, every time a grave was dug, a mass of Roman material would come out. So, you know, it was obviously of interest and something that I ought to be concerned about.
This kind of stuff?
Absolutely. I'm just an enthusiastic amateur, but even I can recognise distinctive Roman material like this. Tegular, piece of Roman tile with ridge, piece of pili, Roman hypocaust bricks.
Are you happy about us digging in your graveyard?
Absolutely.
It doesn't seem quite right.
No, this area has not been dug in before. There are no bodies buried here.
What, this strip along
Absolutely.
here?
Yeah.
But even without any graves, Geophys will still need to scan this narrow strip of churchyard before we open any trenches. We're also surveying the playing field of the next door school, as this is where an intriguing 19th century antiquarian said he found some Roman baths. Our digger gets trench number 1 underway.
See, what we're getting is lots of reflections close to the surface.
John's a bit confused. His radar was showing very little here, but we've barely scratched the surface and we've got archaeology.
But is that?
Which could be that, but
we just forget that.
yeah, I am forgetting it.
This is reality. This will tell us whether there's anything there.
Is that Roman?
Already, pieces of Roman mosaic flooring called tessera are turning up. Back outside, it's now raining cats and dogs on our archaeologists in Trench 1.
Thank you so much.
But despite the weather and the geophys results, this trench is turning into something of a gold mine. We got some finds for
We're getting loads of finds out already. This is just a selection. There's this stuff, which is kind of Saxon-Norman, dates the 11th, early 12th century, around about the time the church was built, so they were quite possibly robbing out the Roman buildings for stone to build the church. And we've got our first bit of early Middle Saxon handmade pottery. 5th, 6th, 7th century, something like that.
What about this chunky stuff here?
Well, we've got Roman as well. There's some bits of Roman colour-coated pottery, which is late 3rd, 4th. Bit of a mosaic tessera as well, possibly. Cracking selection of finds already.
It looks like there's something coming out of the trench field.
Yeah, well, this is the crucial thing, Tony. As Paul says, we are beginning to get Saxon pottery. These are the first levels that we're actually coming down onto. They could include Saxon buildings here.
This is really rather extraordinary for us. We always have a problem finding Saxon on Time Team. To find it, great, but then to find it on the site where we're looking for Roman is a little bit more difficult. What do we find next? So we're going to open our second trench here in the old rectory garden. And after some promising geophys, we've decided to put a third trench in this corner of the school field. This is another spot that our antiquarian artists and later archaeologists have explored. And it seems to have been an artist's favourite, because he drew the remains of this impressive Roman bathhouse he reckoned he'd found here. If so, our trench in the old rectory garden could be right on top of one. But if Artis's plan is accurate, it's the north graveyard where we really need to focus our efforts. So Jim is now geophysiing here. And by mid-afternoon, he's latched onto something.
You've turned up just at the right time. Look at this. We've got a really strong reflector here, and it's at least 5 metres across.
Well, that's nothing like anything else in the churchyard, is it?
No, up until now, I mean, there's been the odd reflection, but they've looked like they could just be stone casket or a slab-lined grave. But I mean, this is much bigger, and it's about halfway up the slope, just beyond where this mess is.
Well, this is where the one building was meant to be from antiquarian records, where they got this early mosaic.
It's possible Jimmy's detected this striking Roman mosaic floor that artist drew in his book of illustrations. And if our antiquarian site plan is to be trusted, it makes sense that geophys are getting a strong signal here.
There must have been something here for them to rob and raid to use.
Yeah. What are you guys doing here? All the excitement's on the far side of the church. You're stuck round the back.
Yeah, but we've been looking at all the Roman stuff built into the church, the tile and the stonework and so on, and the idea that it comes from a huge Roman building that's somewhere round here at the back of the church.
Artists had a theory that all the Roman buildings to the north of the church were one giant structure. And Stephen thinks this is how it might have looked.
Well, it's a pretty enormous building, Tony. I mean, from where we're standing to the far side is 110 metres.
Crikey.
Well, if it's that big, it would absolutely dwarf the church, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. It would be 2 or 3 times bigger than the church.
So what could something that size actually be?
Let's go back to Artis. He called it a praetorium.
What's a praetorium?
Well, in Artis's terms, he was used to digging villas of fairly modest size, and this was the biggest thing that he ever saw and ever dug. And he gave the term praetorium, implying its size.
We've only got one day, Ben. Yeah. What do you think our overall strategy should be?
Well, I think Artis was a very good archaeologist for his time, but I'm not so confident about this sort of floating building here. Yeah, is it attached to the other buildings around it? What alignment is it on? We need a trench across there to try and tie it to the other buildings and sort out the alignment.
Yeah.
Then I think we need to do something similar in the west part of the churchyard, just here. Now,
That's where you can see that wall in the path.
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, I cleaned up a bit of wall there, and there's definitely something there, but I didn't get much of a look at it. Is that a big building range, as Artis depicts it?
I'm off up there now.
So Phil's on the move to this spot just north of the church to help Jackie dig a new trench in the graveyard. And Rakshar's opening a trench as well in the area that Ben's interested in. With over 20,000 burials in this churchyard, it's not going to be easy finding any evidence for our praetorium. But in the rectory garden trench, which Faye's now taken over from Matt, we may be onto something.
What have you actually got going on over there, Tim?
Well, I seem to have this surface. It's got a few tesserae in it, but it's very pebbly and not very good.
Now that's what's interesting, because where I am, I've got nothing. I've got a great big rectangular hole with no archaeology in it, and my only explanation for that can be that this is where Artis shoved his trench, and he basically took everything away with him. And therefore, that's why we've got this line along here, which I think is a knobbed out wall.
Everywhere on this site, we seem to be following in the footsteps of this chap Artis. Some of us quite literally.
I need some measurements from this line now so I can put them on the drawing.
Oh, excuse me, beg your pardon.
You're on time, Matthew.
I think the peg's come out.
Who put the peg in, Matthew?
Sorry, sir, won't happen again.
That's your wages, Dot.
Yes, Mr. Ainsworth.
Right, next the rectory garden next, Matthew.
Anything you say, Mr. Ainsworth?
Back in the graveyard, Phil and Jackie are up against the clock, digging carefully around lots of human bones. They've now only a few hours left to get down to the floor of a potentially massive Roman structure. Are these individual burials, or are they lots of bones on top of each other?
Well, we've had a lot of loose bones spread about, turning up all the way across here. But the difference here is, you can see we've got about 5 skulls all dumped in together in one place.
So do you think that that could be a grave digger who's cleared earlier graves, dug a pit, chucked these in so that more people can be buried?
Yeah, I mean, basically it looks like a charnel pit.
But we do have a problem, don't we, that we've got lots of bones and lots of smashed mosaic, but no structures whatsoever.
What we can be certain of is that in places the grave diggers have been through the Roman floor. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this sort of material. What we've got to hope is that they didn't destroy it all and that they've left some of it for us.
And that means digging deeper?
That means digging deeper.
Thankfully, Rakshar's trench at the western end of the graveyard looks to have got something more substantial.
How's it going? It's going very well, actually. Put this trench in here to find what we thought was a wall coming through there. And lo and behold, we have a huge wall.
That was actually poking out of the ground before you started, wasn't it?
We knew that was there, but I didn't realise how massive it actually is. So we've got one wall here, which is running in that direction. And then where John is, we have the return, and that's running in this direction. So they should actually come out and converge around about here.
It's amazing, isn't it? This is the first time that we have seen anything like the kind of monumental walls that Edmund Artist saw.
Yeah, this is the only trench where we actually have huge walls.
In the old rectory garden, where we're looking for what could be the east wing of our praetorium, we now have 2 trenches. But our main hopes lie with these trenches in the graveyard, Rackshaw's at the western edge, and Phil's just north of the church.
Phil, you know how I said I was getting a lot more building material and big blocks of tessera?
Oh, why?
Now I'm getting lots of pea grit, which is coming, this fine grit, and look what it's coming down onto.
Oh, good Lord. Well, that looks like a floor.
It looks very like a floor. And this is an in situ burial. That's lying directly on top of it by the look of it.
Oh, that is good stuff. I'll tell you what.
Blimey. We could be just inches away from finally getting evidence of a big Roman structure. And crucially, it's slap bang in the middle of our praetorium plan. Back in the old rectory garden, Faye's getting really stuck in.
Cool, this looks a bit different to yesterday. You're well down.
I am, but fantastically, we've got a huge, great big section of wall.
It's a big Roman wall, isn't it?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
And we were a bit worried yesterday about the sort of relative heights of all this. I mean, there's a surface very much higher than the Roman wall.
You can see where Artist put his trench, which is basically this line down in this section here. And I actually think that level there is where he was standing.
Really?
Yeah, which is why it's so compact.
With footprints?
What size boots did he have?
You're so demanding. I haven't got any footprints in there.
And it's also a very significant chunk of walling on the eastern side of what we think is one single enormous building.
Faye's discovery of this massive Roman wall, previously dug by artists, is a really good sign. Maybe we can rely on our antiquarian after all. Meanwhile, there's breaking news from the graveyard. We've spent the last 36 hours poking around in this graveyard, trying to get permissions to dig it, getting permissions to dig it, then finding nothing but Roman rubble and a tumble of old bones. But at last, Phil, we've got something exciting, haven't we?
We have got Artist's floor. Look, if you look down between that pair of legs, you can see a mosaic floor actually in situ.
You're smiling, William.
I'm really excited about this. If Artist is right about this, he might be right about the Praetorium. Here we are. They took Jesus from the house of Caiaphas, Esto Praetorian, to the Praetorium. In Artist's day, he would have heard the word Praetorium when he went to church, because that was the word used to describe where Jesus was arraigned in front of Pontius Pilate.
So he was tried in the Praetorium?
In the Praetorium.
But
go on.
I was going to say, this is so important to what we're trying to do. We've now got the floor. You can actually begin to see some sort of an alignment on the tesserae. We might be able to actually say exactly what the alignment of that building was.
Finally, our efforts in the graveyard are being rewarded.
Raksha, this is awesome. I love this. This is fantastic.
It looks a lot different than it did yesterday.
It is. It's a lot different.
Rakshaw's revealed a huge section of wall and a step foundation. The classic herringbone style shows that this is definitely Roman.
People were a bit sceptical yesterday. I talked about finding this big herringbone wall, and I suspect that people didn't quite believe me. This looks remarkably similar to what was found on the other side of the church in the 50s.
Yes, I remember that. I've seen photographs of
Yeah, it's on a similar line, and he found step foundations like this.
This is a photo of those step foundations excavated at Castor in the 1950s. They're more than 100 metres away from our trench, but they're virtually identical to those found by Rakshaw. And as the last few hours of our dig at Castor tick by, the news just gets better and better.
So what's the story of this trench then, Faye?
Basically, we have a Roman building, and actually down there we've got a room with what looks like a hypercore system. We've actually got a 2-level building.
So what did they do? Fill it in or cover it up and then build something on top?
Or they had stairs that took you up to another room.
Ah, right.
A building on 2 levels makes sense, because the Romans had to factor in the slope of a hill here in the old rectory garden and on the western side of the church. The massive Roman wall that Rackshar found at the western end of the graveyard, nearly 2 metres wide, was built to support a building possibly 3 stories high. And at an extraordinary 110 metres in length, this is the largest Roman building Time Team has ever excavated.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
This is Glendon Hall in Northamptonshire, a building with over 400 years of history. And this bit round here belongs to Martin Hipwell, who decided to build his mother a new house. But when he dug the foundations, he uncovered every builder's worst nightmare: a dead body. And not just one, but another one, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another. So what are they all doing in the outbuildings of an English country house? And just as importantly, how come no one knew they were there? Martin's family live in the stable block, overlooking the Victorian workshop where he discovered the bodies. How's your mum facing up to the fact that there are all these dead bodies under where they're going to live?
I'm more concerned about the skeletons and how they feel about Mother coming to live here.
How did you find them?
The builder, who was on the digger, just came across a piece of bone, which initially we thought was obviously animal, but realised later that it was quite obviously human, and it was this part of a forehead.
How long was it after that that you realised that there wasn't just one body but a whole load?
Straight away, within 10 minutes.
Mick, this is the very first time you've seen these, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you reckon? What's your instinct?
Well, if this is the density of them, where all these yellow marks are, then it suggests it's a cemetery. And if the alignment of these is right, I guess this is what, east-west for these burials?
Yes, almost exactly, yes.
Then we'd assume they were Christian. So it looks to me like some sort of medieval cemetery. That'd be the period I'd think of.
Medieval cemetery sound right to you?
Well, we know there was a church at Glendon many, many years ago. We don't know where it was.
Right.
It would be very interesting to know where the church was. Yeah.
First of all, we'll get to work on 2 of Martin's friends in the south to see what they can tell us about the place where they were buried. Phil will need to dig through a lot of building rubble before he reaches his skeleton, but Jackie McKinley, our burials expert, can already see some bone.
I think I've got some skull here, but it's pretty smashed.
Martin's found bodies all over his building site. Just a few feet away from Jackie, inside the incident room, he's discovered the skeleton of a child. And there was a line of 5 adults under the table where Stuart and Henry are scouring the maps for evidence of the church.
So what you got then, Jackie?
Well, I have got some skull here. You can see it's ever so close to the surface. And at the same level, I've got bits of blue plastic turning up. So whether it's in situ or it's been redeposited, I don't know.
Because I can see there's a bit of bone there.
Yeah.
You can't actually trace it around.
Yeah.
And there's another bit there.
Yeah.
But at least with a skull there, at least you've got something to work to, and you've got a level to work to.
Yeah.
I ain't got a level to work to at the minute.
There's a lot of tumbled windows here and stuff. But that's interesting because that looks like it's part of a very large window originally with sort of round rather than pointed heads to it.
Does that look part of, do they look like church windows to you?
It could be church. I mean, they could even be domestic with that, but even if they are church, they would suggest that something radical going on with this church in the early 16th century. This looks like marble.
Decorated, isn't it?
Yeah, and that looks, it is marble.
So all these bits of church that you see here, you would think are from the church we're looking for?
I would think so, yeah. Not necessarily in the right order, but from the church you're looking for. Right. Yeah, certainly.
So the folly doesn't look like it's the church itself, but at least we now know we're looking for a posh late medieval church. Perhaps that could have been connected to some grand house that was here before the current Glendon Hall. And maybe the people buried in its graveyard lived in that very house.
So we might have a row of graves here, and then perhaps a gap, and then another row of graves here, another gap, so on and so forth.
We're plotting the graves as we find them to work out the shape of the cemetery, and there seems to be a gap under part of the incident room. Geophys are sent in to investigate, but even with ground-penetrating radar, they are finding it difficult to see through the concrete floor.
The graves we've got in this area, just round there's an infant. The two graves that Phil had over there have got what look like an infant and a juvenile in them. And the only adult bone we've had is out of the redeposited bone out of the pit that he's got there.
The grave cuts are narrow, and the arms seem to be positioned tight to the body as if shrouded. This suggests that these are poor burials and not residents of any previous hall. But it turns out that Glendon used to be much more than just a big house. It's described in the Domesday Book as a settlement consisting of 9 households, the remains of which could be in the fields surrounding the hall.
See this bank running along here?
Yeah.
This is interesting because it's exactly parallel to the line of that hollow way.
By the trees?
Yeah, the old roadway. And it's quite possible this is like a back boundary to properties which were fronting that roadway.
Oh, right, OK.
Day 2 here at Glendon Hall in Northamptonshire, where we've discovered over 30 medieval burials, and this morning we're going to peel back all this earth here to see if we can find the church that goes with them. And we're extending a trench over here to find the extent of the cemetery, also one on the far side of this building, another one in there, and a fourth one deep in here, which could prove a little bit difficult. Matt's starting to take off layers of building rubble to look for the church. Meanwhile, Kerry has begun to expose an adult skeleton, which looks in much better nick than the multiple burials emerging from Phil's pit.
Well, this is getting really complicated in here. I mean, back at this end, we've got a burial. We've got the hand and part of the thigh bone down in here, and that represents a burial which is in here, and it's obviously extending underneath here. And then on the top of that, we've got this stone-lined burial with this deposit of just jumbled bones, which must have been put in either when this burial went in or when they actually put the building up.
So if this is a comparatively late grave, we're probably looking at something that's really of relatively high status. I mean, somebody's taken a lot of care and trouble over getting these stones, bringing them in, lining the grave.
It's quite amazing. This is the only grave on the site that has got stones like this.
We'll only lift the burials that Martin's building work would disturb. The others will be allowed to remain where they are in the grounds of Glendon Hall. Yesterday, we were looking for the reason why the old hollow way was diverted from its original course straight through Glendon. But frustratingly, Geophys aren't able to come up with an explanation. If it's not beside the kink in the road, it's even more likely that our church is inside the cemetery. So Ian is about to put in our third test pit, deep in the undergrowth on the east side. Once he gets the digger into the copse, he'll be on the lookout for more burials. At the other end of the cemetery, Raksha has found a piece of a child's jawbone.
Do we know how old it is at all?
Well, it's obviously an infant. It's still got its milk teeth. This is a milk tooth, that's a milk tooth, and you've got one of the permanent teeth coming through, developed in there. So it's about sort of 3 to 4, something like that.
So we now know that the cemetery extends further to the west, but in the east there are no signs of any more burials. Jackie is taking a look at the skeleton in Kerry's trench.
It's much smaller and more gracile than some of the other adult skeletons we've seen.
What does gracile mean?
Quite slightly built, petite, one might say.
Yeah.
This angle here looks fairly broad, which would suggest you've got a female, but it'd be easy to tell when we can see more of it.
What about these bones here?
Well, that looks like we've got at least 2 there, unless somebody's got 3 big toes, which isn't very likely. So there's at least parts of 2 more going off in that direction. Again, adult ones they look like.
Phil's burials are still multiplying. He's now revealed a stone-lined grave, a jumble of bones, a child and the skeleton of a baby.
So we've got 4 interconnecting burials, all in a very small space, which really is probably what I'd expect from a medieval cemetery.
Yeah, but it seems to be very different from what we've got over here with what looks like graves that are neat and tidy and respecting each other.
Seems to be. I mean, you've got to remember, with these burials, we haven't yet lifted one intact skeleton. We don't actually know that they're actually sitting on the bedrock natural. It's perfectly possible that there might be more bodies underneath.
We're beginning to work on the village where these people lived. Stuart's looking for a spot to put in a trench to confirm that the platforms on the south side of the Holloway really are the remains of the village of Glendon. While geophysics are hoping to add some detail to the earthworks survey in the north field by using magnetometry, which shows up signs of occupation such as ditches and pits. What's all this?
This is the Glendon dog graveyard, Tony.
Dog graveyard?
Yeah, the pets and the pack animals that lived here many years ago. We've even got a ledger here dating back to 1793 with some of the dogs' names. We've got Lively, Lady, Lily, Lovely.
Have you seen this one?
Yes. I thought you'd like that.
Tony. It's ironic, isn't it, that on the far side of this building we've got the Victorians hacking the earlier dead bodies to pieces, totally failing to record their names, while at the same time on this side of the building they're creating their own little idyllic graveyard to the memory of their pets. We're beginning to find some pottery where our village might have stood.
What you got? Looking at this, it's all the sort of the standard medieval course words we get around here. Starts in the sort of 12th century, goes through the 13th, 14th. Right. This bit's particularly interesting because it's a medieval Shelley word jug handle. The jug handles like this only tend to be 12th century. They go out when the glazed industry comes in the 13th. So that gives us a reasonably early date. It's quite nice, that.
Well, there's quite a lot of other stuff down here, look.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, look at that, that's lovely. Well, that's your 13th, 14th century glazed ware. That's sort of Stannion lived in. It's only made like about 10 miles up the road. I mean, with that and these, I mean, we're looking 12th to 14th century probably.
Well, that's just the life of the settlement, isn't it?
It is. It's all coming out of this earthwork here, which we think is the house, and all in concentration.
Well, you've got more pottery out of this trench than you've got from the whole of the cemetery area up there. So, I mean,
well, I'm sure this is where they live in the earthworks to give the game away, you know. So.
Yeah, true.
Things are progressing in the cemetery. By the end of the second day, another skeleton is emerging in Rackshire's first test pit, but nothing more from either of 2 further test pits. So by the end of day 2, we have the extent of the cemetery on the north, the west and the east. The church should be somewhere within this area. This grave cut marks the furthest west point of our cemetery. Behind me over there, we've got around 40 bodies. Not only that, but we know the names of some of the people and even how much land they had. But if we want to find out more about their lives, we're going to have to look further afield than here. We're going to have to get really stuck into the earthworks, the site of the original medieval village. 2 of the villagers who lived and worked in these fields are being revealed for the first time since they died 6 to 7 centuries ago. Jack is preparing to lift the tiny pelvis of a baby who was probably born a few weeks premature and didn't survive the birth.
See all this pottery?
Yeah.
It's all late Saxon. This piece in particular has got me really excited. Can you see the traces of red paint on it? I mean, probably a little bit difficult to see.
Yeah.
We know where this is from. It's from Stamford. They've dug the kiln. That's no later than about 910 AD.
So Martin's friends in the south weren't the first people in Glendon. But the hard life that they led is evident in their bones even now.
If we start off here, he's got really bad dental abscesses. That's just one of them there. And that would have been both very painful and his breath would have been quite smelly. You wouldn't want to needed to stand this close to him. Oh, God.
That's
you horrible creature. Oh, dearie me.
How old is he?
About your age, I should think. Yeah, so sort of older.
Prime of life.
Yes, if you say so, Phil. And then we've got some sinusitis. If you look just inside this area here, you can see there's this very fine woven new bone inside the sinus cavity. Now this is this part of the sinus, and you know how painful it is when you get sinusitis. It goes right up into your head. So he'd have had a bad head as well. But his spine's the real giveaway, because this tells us what kind of a hard life he had and how much physical labour he did. You can see he's got this new bone growth around the edge of the vertebra, and these are called osteophytes, and that's basically a reflection of age-related wear and tear. So he's been doing a lot of hard physical manual labour, lots of bending and lifting, probably a bit like you've been doing over the past 3 days, lots of shoveling and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I've been doing it for more than 3 days. I've been doing it my whole lifetime.
Well, he probably has. Well, you might actually look like this underneath.
Working in these fields would have been slow and backbreaking. Today we have modern mechanical diggers, but they don't seem to be helping us locate the village where our peasant farmers lived.
It's too clean, isn't it? It's just way too clean. Yeah. What we really need is, like, you know, big piles of bone and pot and black stuff. It's just not there.
If our medieval peasants weren't living in the south field, surely they must have been in the north field. But we've only got half a day left to find out. Straight away, it looks like we're starting to get some results.
Oh, bingo, look at that. Lovely.
That's it.
That's 13th century, yeah. Yeah. Mind you, we're getting pottery over the other side. We don't have any features to go with it.
Oh, we've got features here. Look.
Yeah, it looks like it, doesn't it?
Just in this area here is a mound, just there.
Oh, yeah.
And the position of it, when you compare it with Victor's drawing, gives you the exact perspective and line that matches the drawing. And what I think that mound is a garden feature on which they put something like an obelisk or
that's
an eye
the
catcher.
spike we can see on
That's
the
it, yeah.
right.
I think it's a garden feature. It fits in with the design layout we see for this parkland, and it's exactly the sort of thing you get in this kind of grand landscape.
Such grand gardens seem worlds away from the lives of the medieval peasants in our cemetery, who somehow managed to keep the village going for 150 years after the Black Death. Phil's finally ready to find out what's inside the stone-lined grave he found yesterday.
There's something buried underneath there. It's a big old stone, isn't it?
It is.
Go on, have a look.
Ooh.
Anything underneath there?
Wonderful thing.
Don't give me that.
I can't see anything. I'm afraid. Shall I hold the matter? Can you have a look?
Yes. Well, no, I'm not. Have you got it?
Yep. Oh, look, one bit of bone.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Come on back, you can do it.
Under the stone is yet more bone, so we have another conundrum on our hands. Perhaps we're not looking at a grave after all.
So this could be sitting on top of this great mass of redeposited bone, and could actually be the base of a grave, do you think? A base of a stone-lined grave? We've got enough room.
I don't think, no, because it would put the grave up there.
Yeah, and that's too high, do you think?
I'm sure it is. I just wonder whether, I mean, wonder if it's not a wall foundation, is it?
Wall of what were you precisely thinking? Wall of church, were you thinking?
Well, it makes you wonder.
At last, this is the clue we've been waiting for. The stone lies at the end of the robbed-out wall which Phil discovered earlier. Our archaeologists agree that it seems most likely that the original 13th century church must have been where the rear of the incident room stands. An extension was added later over the first burials that Martin found.
So we've all learnt a lot from this. We've been on a steep learning curve, and it's sort of changed our ideas.
It's a lesson for all of us. I mean, there's no stone buildings there, and they should be in those enclosures.
So where is the village?
Well, we know where it isn't, because we know where all the medieval fields are around here. We know it's not down the other end. So there's only one place it can be, really.
Which is?
Under these buildings behind us.
I mean, Northamptonshire villages almost always find the church in the heart of the village, and the church is just over there.
The medieval village of Glendon must have been near the church where the rambling buildings of Glendon Hall now stand. In 1514, a new landowner decided that sheep pasture would be a more profitable use of land, and so he pulled down most of the houses, evicting 62 people. Shortly after that, the first Glendon Hall was built, and the church became a private chapel complete with expensive Flemish glass. The next 4 centuries saw generations of landowners demolish, build and add to the hall, just as Martin was doing when he found his first friend in the south.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
We're spending the next 3 days in the rich agricultural landscape of southeast Leicestershire. Over the years, these fields have been investigated by archaeologists as part of the Langton Brook Survey, and they found all sorts of evidence of Anglo-Saxon activity. And we've now used their results to focus in on 2 of the most intriguing areas hidden amongst these massive fields. This is the result of the group's field walking. As you can see, it's a simple grid, and on it is written the various concentrations of finds that were discovered. This is a classic way to discover Anglo-Saxon sites, which quite honestly are very difficult to find using other techniques. But we're not using this just for archaeological information. As you can see, we've chopped down about 2 hectares of oilseed rape. That's about 5 acres, and we've done that based on the information on this grid, which is a great idea, Mick, but some finds in a field and we're looking for cemeteries and goodness knows what. It does seem a bit of an act of faith.
Yeah, well, they're not easy things to find from field walking or, in fact, geophysics, but luckily I have 2 partners in crime with me on this. We've got Jackie, who knows about the bones from cemeteries, and Helen knows about the finds that come from cemeteries. So I'm going to defer to them a lot of the time.
All right, Jackie, what do you think when you see that?
What this is showing us is the concentration of pottery, and the kind of pottery that's been turning up here is the sort of decorated pottery that is normally associated with cremation urns. So we may well have a cremation cemetery. That's one of the suggestions. The other thing this doesn't show you is that we've also got metalwork finds from here. We've got brooches and strap ends, exactly the kind of things that you get in inhumation burial, so we could have a mixed rite cemetery.
Helen, Anglo-Saxon England is your passion. What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm thinking about how exciting it is that we don't just have what I think must be a cemetery up here. We've also got this other very interesting site down here. Now, we've got concentrations of pottery that's not decorated, that looks more domestic, and there's no metalwork down here. So possibly what we may have is a settlement and a cemetery from the same period.
We've also got probably a Roman villa there.
But surely we don't want to excavate a Roman site when we've got all this Anglo-Saxon to do.
But it can help us to understand the transition between Roman Britain and Anglo-Saxon England.
It's a lot for 3 days, though, isn't it?
Yeah. It usually is.
So we're going to put Trench 1 in to investigate the greatest concentration of results. And it's going to be massive.
So we want 40 from that corner.
Only one problem, the 30-metre tape.
30-metre tape, yeah.
We plan to dig a whopping 40-metre by 40-metre trench. It's so big that it could take us all 3 days to dig it.
That's horrible stuff, that is.
I suppose that's the Midlands for you, is it?
So while the machine starts in the southwest corner of Trench 1 to look for grave cuts...
It doesn't matter how big an area you strip, you've got to be able to see stuff.
We'll send in the metal detectorists at the top corner to see if they can pick up any more evidence of the metal grave goods. Brooches, spears, belt buckles and the like that characterise Anglo-Saxon burials.
You've definitely got something there, but...
And as if on cue...
This has just come out of the ground. It's really a rather nice late 5th, early 6th century fragment of a small long brooch. Exactly what we would want from a burial site of this period.
Right.
Suggests a woman, they wear these on their shoulders. These are indicating probably burials. I would think so. You don't find hardly any of these on settlement sites.
No.
You find them with dead Anglo-Saxon women.
Unfortunately, this particular dead Anglo-Saxon woman's brooch is a good 30 metres away from Phil's trench. Phil, you got anything yet?
Not a sausage, Tony.
Now, this is really weird because We've been excavating like mad. As you can see, they've got an enormous amount of dirt out already and nothing at all. But over here, where the metal detectorists have been working, they've got loads of lovely little metal finds, including this one, which they think is some kind of fastening, maybe off a belt. It is Saxon, and it's got these lovely little pieces of gold decoration on. So, nothing there where we thought we'd find a load, and lots of stuff here. What's going on?
There's nothing that's unequivocal grave size or shape there, is there?
There is absolutely nothing in it.
It's like a fairground ride, isn't it?
On the plus side, it means we can now throw all our diggers at the 2 trenches that have the Iron Age ditch in them, and more importantly, the possible Anglo-Saxon cemetery that lies inside it.
Yeah, that's the first bit, as I'm aware of, that's actually come out of a trench.
Yeah.
Where is a pottery expert when you most need him?
We've got some prehistoric flint, a whole mass of Roman late Iron Age pottery.
Well, I know exactly where he is. Up the hill at Rackshaw's Trench, where he's now confirmed the ditch is Iron Age. But what's more, it was visible right throughout Roman times and on into the Anglo-Saxon period.
We have got 4 sherds of early Middle Saxon handmade pottery, so we've finally found what we're looking for.
So we've got a bit of everything, really.
Well, the interesting thing is the Saxon pottery all seems to be coming off the top of the ditch.
Right.
Now, you do sometimes get Saxon sunken featured huts actually dug into the top of ditches.
Yeah, well, there we are. It's your task for tomorrow.
I'll crack on then.
Come and have a look at this.
It's the same confusing story in Phil's Trench.
In here, look, we've got this, you see, look, there you can see the edge of it going along there and back round here. It's a big square feature. Now, is it a pit? Is it a grave? I really don't know. But the stranger thing is, look here, we've actually got what looks like a beam slot.
What's a beam slot?
Well, a beam slot would be a foundation for a building. So is it actually a settlement? I don't really know. One thing I do know is we've actually got pottery, which somehow or another, I'm sure it's got to be Saxon.
This is really intriguing. It looks like we might have evidence of where the Anglo-Saxons lived in a cemetery. What were they doing living in a cemetery? I really don't understand this site.
The animal art here is really good, really crisp, really well made.
Yeah. The metalwork we've discovered, like this belt fitting we found yesterday, says Anglo-Saxon cemetery.
These things attached to the gaudy kind of heavy man's belt that could have carried something heavy like a sword.
But the archaeology Phil and his team are now carefully unpicking suggests Anglo-Saxon settlement. And Anglo-Saxon settlements and cemeteries don't normally go together. There's clearly been a lot of activity up here, and all of it seems to have occurred inside the massive Iron Age ditch Geophys discovered yesterday.
It almost looks like there's one ditch there and there's another one here, isn't there? So 2 ditches, possibly even 3, in fact, if you count that end grave bit.
Look what has just come off the spoil tip.
Back up in the top field, we're now convinced we've got an Anglo-Saxon cemetery.
We've actually got 4 separate pieces, but it's the same brooch.
Yeah. They're one of the earlier forms of brooch. It seems like they don't outlast the first half of the 6th century, and everything else fits in with that same date range. It's all late 5th, early 6th century, which is quite tight and quite early.
But it is a cemetery.
Well, that can't have come from anything else.
Well, but then you see there's a problem, because this metalwork here and all the other metalwork come from this end of the trench. That is exactly the same area as all the pottery from the field walking and also from the pottery that we're getting. Paul has had a look at it and it kind of hints that the actual pottery is not cemetery related but domestic related. In other words, it looks like we've actually got a settlement and a cemetery in the same area.
So what's going on? What would be the explanation for that?
They don't have to be mutually exclusive. All this metalwork that we're getting is early.
Yeah.
The pottery extends into the 8th century potentially. So, I mean, we could have, and I think that's very likely, that we've got a cemetery to start with, and later on we've got a settlement over the top of it.
So we're now looking at an Anglo-Saxon site that spanned centuries and was at different times a home to the living and the dead.
Whoa!
Brilliant.
Oh Oh, bring it on.
And even as we're discussing the finery left in Anglo-Saxon graves, up on site, Phil is uncovering a spectacular example of a grave good.
Look at the colour of that. Oh, look at that.
Does look like there's bits
Hey?
of gold on it.
It's got gold on it.
Looks like tiny, see?
Oh, look at the way it shines in the sun.
It's now just after lunch on day 2, and in the space of a few hours, Phil has miraculously uncovered not 1, not 2, but at least 4 potential burials.
You can actually see it in here. And in fact, the easiest way to see it is actually to focus in on this area of stones. You can see that it is actually an oval type area.
Right.
So that's one of them. The next one is a little bit easier to see, actually. It's a very clear line with charcoal down one edge.
Yeah.
And you can see underneath this bucket, we've got bead there, another one there.
There's one over there
And
too.
one over
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
So we know that there's likely to have been an amber necklace.
You said 4 burials.
And I've only shown you 3 of them. Have a look at this last one. Underneath here.
What's going on there, Phil?
Well, here we've got an enormous brooch. I'm in between this enormous bow.
So that's a really big one then.
I know, absolutely stunning.
That is good, isn't it?
Fantastic, yeah.
Well done, mate.
The higher up we can get, the better, really.
It looks like we've now got ourselves a mini time team in this one trench. There's the Iron Age enclosure ditch, Phil's 4 burials, plus a number of other intriguing targets identified by the metal detectorists.
It's absolutely bloody brilliant on this. Can't wait, hang on.
And there's no shortage of archaeology or targets down in the Villa Field, where we're hoping to find an Anglo-Saxon settlement.
Tracy, this is the tesserae then.
Yes.
Look what I've just found alongside.
Oh, that's nice. That's got to be hypercourse tiles.
Well, that's a good start without digging.
We're now putting in a second trench to look for evidence of day-to-day Saxon life.
No pottery yet.
No?
Not what I'm saying anyway, no.
And not a sniff of Saxon again.
Right now.
I think I have got a tiny, weeny little bit of burnt bone out of here as well.
Ooh.
I mean, it looks like a piece of one of the forearm bones.
So you can tell from a piece of bone that small that it's a piece of a human forearm.
It's now almost the end of day 2. And thanks to the motorised Lone Ranger of the pottery world, we now have proof that, as well as burials, we have at least 1 Anglo-Saxon cremation on site.
Oh yeah, that's Saxon.
Oh, jolly good.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's quite nice quality as well. It's early middle, as you'd expect, the sort of thing we're looking for, the handmade stuff.
The problem is, the shape of this feature doesn't match the normal practice of cremated remains buried in a jar or a pot.
What we've got here may not be the remains of a burial. It may be the remains of some other type of cremation-related deposit.
What do you mean? It might be a pyre?
It might be pyre debris. It might be the remnants of a pyre site.
That's really rare, though, isn't it?
It is quite rare, yeah. But that's why, you know, I'm not too worried about that not being part of an urn, but I am interested in what part of the Saxon it's in.
It looks like it's going to be a busy day, because we've established that inside the massive Iron Age ditch is an Anglo-Saxon cemetery with evidence of all sorts of burial rituals. From Jackie's cremation...
I think it is the most gorgeous thing.
Yeah. To the grave with our star find, this fantastic gilded brooch.
Is it an equal arm brooch?
It is an equal arm brooch.
These things blow me away. I've only ever seen one of these once before, and that was in 1975, and it was a dig in my own village. I've never ever seen one since. I never ever dreamt that I would be here and actually have one in front of me.
We've so far identified 4 burials in just one small portion of our trench.
Phil, I think we've got something.
And the finds have suggested they all belong to women.
It certainly looks like another brooch, doesn't it? And we've got a little smear of iron there, which presumably going to be the pin.
That is, until now.
Helen, you know, we had 4 burials. It looks like we've actually got a 5th one.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, you see, it's actually in here.
Oh, look. Wow. That's a small long brooch, definitely. Can you see that there's a kind of nick down there? So it's only what's called a trefoil-headed one, with 1, 2, 3 rounded lobes.
And that is likely to be up on the shoulders here, is it?
Of a woman, though, so up on these shoulders rather than yours.
I don't care what the sex is. I'm worried about the position of the find. But look what we've got this morning. Got this iron thing coming up at that end there.
It's kind of tubular, though, isn't it? Because the obvious thing that looks like is the ferrule off a spear.
That's
Yes.
That's what I was working for.
If this is a lady, she should not have a spear.
Pottery.
Pottery as well.
Even at this late stage of the dig, this cemetery trench is still producing new discoveries.
So one end of the ditch is there.
Mm-hmm. But our other field is also crammed full of archaeology, and it's the big, chunky variety.
Thought it ended here,
Yeah,
but no,
right.
the grave field is going along. There's the other end there, a good, 7 metres?
We had hoped to find evidence of Anglo-Saxon settlement, or even more burials, near or on top of an earlier Roman villa here. But instead, we seem to have stumbled upon a site that could keep a team of diggers going for a month. But at least we've now solved one mystery in the cemetery. The mystery of the grave with the potential cross-dressing wild women with the brooches and spear.
I can't really see where their heads were, other than just from the grave goods.
Hang on, you said where their heads were?
Yes.
There's not one person in here, there's 2. We now have only a few hours left of day 3. But with storm clouds looming, the whole dig looks under threat of grinding to a halt. Cool, Matt, have you been upsetting the gods?
It's getting pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Come on, baby, come on. Got it. I've got it.
And all that effort's worth it. Because back in the conservation lab, the brooch, now heavily taped to hold it together, is revealed as a fragile but gobsmacking work of art.
It's pretty impressive, eh, Phil?
It's amazing.
It looks as if it's pretty well all survived.
Oh. This one here is only the 4th one of this type.
Get out.
Yeah.
The 4th?
To be found in Britain. But it's probably the best of the lot.
It almost seems like a Victorian cemetery, that you've got all these different kinds of burials going on at the same time.
That's a really good analogy, actually, because all of these burials, I think, would have been marked in some way. Or a little mound, maybe flowers planted on them, something like that that we can't recover archaeologically. And then you've got to imagine the whole thing contained within this big Iron Age earthwork.
As with so many Anglo-Saxon sites, the evidence of settlement has almost completely eluded us. And yet we've still learnt so much from the departed.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.